Welcome back, y'all. Once again, we are at Mays Hall at First Baptist Church, Lancaster, Texas, and I wanted to share some more with you about the church family of First Baptist. We share faith in the supremacy of God our Father, the lordship of His Son Jesus, who died an atoning death on the cross and was resurrected on the third day, and the ministering presence of the Holy Spirit in our lives. I invite you to join us at 10:30 on Sunday morning for worship. The congregation of First Baptist has been meeting and trusting in God's grace and mercy as we go through these uncertain times. I am humbled to be presenting the Bible lesson today, following the excellent and experienced Bible teachers Dr. Greg Stroud and Ray Winnett. If you haven't watched them, you can find the links on the First Baptist website. So today we continue moving through the study of the book of Ruth. Last week, Naomi is learning to have faith, trusting God for who He is, and not because there is a balance sheet that God maintains to make things equal out. Naomi shows us how God's resurrection power leads her from Moab back to Bethlehem, but what is unseen is God's resurrection power that is at work in their lives. Continuing their journey to Bethlehem, despair, Naomi, and hope, Ruth, took with them their belongings and their theology that we labeled baggage. Like Naomi, hopelessness weights us down. We finally met Boaz, a man of strength. Like the other names in the book of Ruth, which we covered in the past week, his name is a reflection of Boaz the man. Today we will find the spiritual symbolism of the threshing floor. We covered the celebration of the barley harvest, the importance of the harvest in order to live. Harvest is that we reap what we sow. Have you heard that expression? We are moving toward what will be Naomi's harvest when finally God will provide the end of her suffering. Harvest is also a metaphor for spiritual growth. 2 Corinthians 9:10. Throughout this study, Naomi and Ruth's harvest is being prepared by God. So going forward with our story, Boaz graciously places Ruth under his protection. She is a kinswoman by marriage, and so he can address her either as sister or daughter, as we find in Ruth 2:8. Ruth is recognized as a symbol of Hesed, but now we see the same covenant loyalty displayed by Boaz. These are two people of extraordinary character. In Ruth 8:9, she responds graciously, acknowledging her gratitude for his kind words and expressing her surprise that he is extending his kindness to a woman who is not of his people. In Ruth 2:12, we hear, "May Yahweh repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by Yahweh, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to refuge." Boaz's petition to Yahweh for reward for Ruth is a summary of the theme of the book of Ruth. Whoever seeks the shelter of Yahweh will be rewarded. The Jewish Study Bible notes that the rabbis interpret this phrase as a reference to Ruth's conversion. We also see that a powerful gospel scene is unfolding, that a gleaner is seated with the paid workers in Ruth 2:15. A Moabitess is sitting at the table with Israelites. Boaz's treatment of Ruth is not only demonstrates his Hesed to a kinswoman and an impoverished foreigner by marriage, but fulfills another commandment of the law. It's the same command that Jesus will quote in Matthew 22:39 as the second greatest commandment after love of God, expanding the command beyond one's kinsmen and women, Leviticus 19:18. This righteous man is also fulfilling the command to love your neighbor as yourself. He's an Ezer. The church calls the charitable acts and works of mercy when we come to the aid of our neighbor in bodily spiritual distress as fruits of the Spirit that we found in Galatians 5, 22 and 23. The spiritual works of mercy, instructing, advising, consoling, comforting, forgiving, bearing the wrongs of others patiently, our corporate works of mercy and almsgiving to the poor, feeding the hunger, sheltering the homeless and clothing the naked, and visiting the sick and in prison and burying the dead. So when Ruth returns with grain enough to feed them in Ruth 2:18, Naomi is suddenly hopeful and thankful and blesses the unknown benefactor in Yahweh's name in Ruth 2:19 and cites Yahweh's divine faithfulness. And when she learns the name of the benefactor in verse 20, Naomi blesses Boaz a second time, this time by name for his Hesed, his covenant loyalty to Naomi and Ruth, and therefore to his deceased kinsman Elimelech. The women are grateful for Boaz's offer of protection for Ruth, who is a young woman who might have been taken advantage of by the male workers, but she is the daughter of a people who are Israel's enemies, and the Rachel hatred for her people put her in danger. Chapter 3 of the book of Ruth. Naomi's plan for Ruth. Naomi tells Ruth to dress in her best clothes and go where Boaz has been winnowing the barley on the threshing floor. In Ruth 3:11, Boaz says, "All my fellow townsmen know that you are a woman of noble character." Boaz foreshadows how Jesus would one day reach out to women, the Samaritan woman, Mary Magdalene, who were rejected by their peers but are empowered by Jesus to serve him. The specific word Boaz used was Hayil, which is an elite warrior similar to the hero in Homer's epic, a word meaning a woman having all the attributes of her male counterpart. Boaz is comparing Ruth to an Ezer, a warrior fighting diligently for the rescue of the Elimelech family. Boaz tells Ruth to wait until morning because no one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor. Again, Boaz is protecting Ruth's reputation because if she's seen leaving the threshing floor, there will be gossip. Boaz instructs her to give him her shawl that he poured 6 measures of barley onto, and she returns to town, arriving at the house of Naomi, and she tells her what happened on the threshing floor. As we look into what is a threshing floor, back in the Bible days, it was a smooth, flat surface that was used to process grain. Before there was machinery, farmers used the threshing floor to separate the grain from the chaff. The harvest produced would be spread over the threshing floor, and then animals, cattle, or oxen would be led over it to crush and break the sheaves apart with their hooves. At times, people used sticks to beat the sheaves apart, as in Ruth 2:17. The grain would be separated from the husks or chaff and then tossed into the air so that the wind could blow the chaff away, leaving only the good edible grain. This was called winnowing. Why did Boaz stay at the threshing floor when the work was finished? Threshing floors were in danger of being robbed, as we are told in 1 Samuel 23:1. For this reason, someone always sleeps on the floor until the grain is removed, which we learned in Ruth 3:7. So the threshing floor is important in the biblical story of Ruth and Boaz. In those times when a woman's husband died, it was difficult for her to survive on her own, and the woman would be redeemed by her husband's nearest kinman. Ruth was encouraged by Naomi to go down to the threshing floor where Boaz was winnowing barley. She was to wait until he had finished eating and drinking and was lying down for the night, and then uncover his feet and lay down, for that was the symbol of her desire to be redeemed by Boaz, as we see in Ruth 3:1-18. The connection between the kinsman redeemer and the threshing floor in this story is not incidental. The threshing floor is symbolic of the judgment in the Bible. Old Testament prophet Hosea prophesied that Israel would be like the morning mist or like the dew that goes early away, like the chaff that swirls from the threshing floor, or like smoke from a window. Hosea 13:3. Of the nations who will come against God during the end times, the prophet Micah says, "They do not know the thoughts of the Lord. They do not understand his plan, that he has gathered them as sheaves to the threshing floor." The idea is that Israel will demolish their enemies like oxen trampling grain on the threshing floor. That's in Micah 4:11 and 13. Chaff is referred to in the Psalms as the symbol of the destruction of the wicked, Psalms 1:4. The threshing floor has spiritual significance as a place where good and evil are separated. Ruth symbolizes the believer or spiritual Israel, for she was a Gentile who converted to Judaism. Ruth 1:16. Boaz is a symbol of Christ, the Redeemer. When Ruth comes to the threshing floor, she is in need, and he has responded to Boaz's previous kindness and generosity. She has learned that he is a good man, and she trusts him. The fact that her petition takes place at the threshing floor among the grain and the chaff is a beautiful symbol of man's need for redemption and God's identity as Redeemer. We find that in Job 19:25 and Psalms 19:14 and Psalm 78:35. The difference between the grain and the chaff, between good and evil people, is not their good or evil works. The grain is gathered into the barn by faith, by the gift of God, who provides righteousness and spiritual safety through Jesus Christ, our kinsman redeemer, as in Romans 1:17. John the Baptist also used the imagery of the threshing floor to describe the coming Messiah who would separate the true believers from the false. The true followers of Christ will be gathered into the kingdom of God, just as grain is gathered into barns, while those who reject Christ will be burned up with unquenchable fire, just as the worthless chaff is burned, as we saw in Matthew 3:12 and Luke 3:17. He used the harvest and the threshing floor as images of the Messiah's power to bring God's divine judgment to the righteous and the wicked. In the Bible, harvest and threshing floor are often used as symbols of divine judgment. The altar of David, built for Yahweh, and later the site of the Jerusalem temple, where God sifted souls of the just from the wicked, was formerly the site of a threshing floor. That's in 2 Samuel 24:18 through 25. The imagery of the threshing floor and God's judgment is found in other Old Testament books, such as Daniel and Psalms and Job and Jeremiah and Joel. The same imagery is found in the book of Revelation, in Revelation 14 through 20. It is interesting that the single most climatic moment in the story of Ruth will take place on Bethlehem's threshing floor, when Boaz must make a decision that will have an impact on his life and on salvation history. The next morning, Boaz wastes no time and goes to the city gate, where all of the business of the city is conducted. The city gates were important business transactions were made, court was convened, and public announcements were heralded. Boaz waits for the arrival of Elimelech's anonymous nearest relative. As we covered earlier, this could have been evidence of the author's disdain of the man because of his refusal to help Naomi and Ruth, that he is unnamed. Boaz assembled 10 elders as witnesses to the proceeding. Boaz begins and presents that Naomi has to sell the Elimelech family's land in order to survive. Naomi cannot keep the land because there are no men left in the Elimelech family to possess the land. The no-name relative offers to buy the property until he finds out that this is a package deal. The no-name relative chooses not to redeem the land, with his excuse being that it could endanger his own estate. The unnamed relative tells Boaz, "Buy it yourself," and he removed his sandal as an indication of sealing the contract. Boaz, as we learned, is an Israelite blue blood, and his grandfather was one of Israel's greatest leaders, Nashon, who was the tribal chief of Judah, Israel's largest tribe, and the commanding general of the largest division of Israel's army. Anyone born into this family was of a greatly elevated social and political class, much like the nation of Israel's first family. As such, there was an expectation of Boaz's higher standards and the community's regard for Boaz's stature as a good, honest, righteous man, so they don't question why is Naomi selling the property. The unnamed relative stands to inherit the land by default that Boaz has threatened the natural progression of by applying pressure to act now instead of waiting for Naomi to eventually die. The unnamed relative is ready to take over the property for which he can recoup his money easily. He's ready to sign on the dotted line until Boaz plays the trump card when he brings Ruth into the bargain as the linchpin of this transaction in Ruth 4:5. Bible scholars have criticized the men of Bethlehem for failure to act sooner. The nearest relative has been nowhere in sight upon Naomi's return to Bethlehem. While Boaz granted Ruth special gleaning privileges, could he have done something more? When Ruth becomes a part of the bargain for the land, the stakes are now much higher. The Levirate law applied to Naomi, Elimelech's childless widow. Ruth's proposal of marriage to Boaz on the threshing floor was another example that she was looking beyond the letter of the law, instead to pursue the spirit of the law. The law required a childless man's brother to marry his widow and produce a son. The unnamed relative and Boaz were not brothers of Elimelech, and they didn't meet the requirement. Ruth navigates around this impassable roadblock that Naomi was too old to bear children and that neither relative was Elimelech's brother. This was my aha moment, that Ruth volunteers herself to bear a child for the Elimelech family, to be their heir according to the town records, and the child will inherit the land. We see again how Ruth is an Ezer. Here, the high-stakes gamble is if the unnamed relative accepts the offer of Ruth, who has been barren for years. If she never conceives, the land becomes his free and clear. All that is Naomi's becomes his estate, and he has enriched himself and his heirs. But the unnamed relative has seen Yahweh has already shaken things up for this young Moabitess. The unnamed relative can't take that chance. The chance to endanger his own estate if Ruth bears a child. The land will remain in Elimelech's family. The unnamed relative, following ancient custom, removes his sandal and hands it over to Boaz, sealing the transaction. The redemption and exchange of land to confirm any matter, the man removed his sandal and gave it to another, and it was a matter of attestation in Israel, as in Ruth 4:7. I work in a law firm. I should know that word. After this procedure was followed in Ruth 4:8, every bond was broken between the kinsman redeemer and Ruth, and consequently Boaz was legally free to marry Ruth. The union of Ruth and Boaz was orchestrated by God. Ruth and Boaz were image bearers. They were subduing the portion of earth that God had entrusted into their stewardship, but they were also restoring the royal line of the Messiah. Remember the cultural mandate that God gave to Adam and Eve? That was in our first lesson. To develop the social world, build families, and the second mandate was to subdue the earth, to plant crops and build civilizations. Boaz and Ruth's child will be the grandfather of King David and the ancestor of Jesus. God called 3 of his image bearers in the book of Ruth, led by an Ezer, not for a women's movement, but a blessed alliance, male and female, husband and wife, serving God. Together they are changing the world. Ruth shows up unannounced in his field, and she's not looking for husband material. She's there to provide for Naomi. Ruth's ability to see outside the box of convention and push the boundaries are reinforced by Boaz becoming her ally and embracing God's call on her life. Together they pursue God's laws and are favored by Yahweh, serving God together as He is changing them. Ruth did not take the path of least resistance, accepting the fate of widows in ancient patriarchal society. When Yahweh called, she did not hesitate to throw caution to the wind. We're back to the threshing floor. Caution can be a symptom of faithlessness. How about for the unnamed relative? How about Orpah, Elimelech, his sons, even Ruth, and even me? How often have we said no to God in an abundance of caution, and we miss God's blessings? When her heart locked on Yahweh, Ruth chose not to continue to live her life in caution and fear. Ruth's courage to follow Naomi back to Bethlehem, to the backbreaking work of gleaning barley in the heat and dust, to follow Naomi's instructions to sleep under Boaz's cloak, her courage to ask Boaz to marry her. Naomi's empty, broken life is finally recharged. Ruth will provide Naomi with an heir. Ruth and Boaz's alliance provides a rare glimpse into the Old Testament blessed alliance. As male and female partners thriving as God's image bearers, we can see God's fingerprints on the stories of Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz in the book of Ruth. God's instructions to rule and subdue the earth, God's promised future kingdom through Ruth and Boaz's child. When the sandal is exchanged from the unnamed relative to Boaz, the elders and all the people at the city gate witnessed the purchase and blessed the Lord for Ruth, perhaps because they knew Ruth's sacrifice and dedication to Naomi. They compared Ruth to Leah and Rachel, who built the family of Israel. In Ruth 4:12, through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, who Tamar bore to Judah. So finally, in Ruth 13 through 15, Boaz and Ruth are married, and I put a side note in here, cue wedding music, because I'm sure the town celebrated. I hope they did. After many years of childlessness, Ruth conceives and gives birth to a son. The women of Bethlehem praise the Lord, giving her a guardian redeemer, and declare, may he be famous through Israel and renew Naomi's life and sustain her in old age. Naomi took the child and cared for him. The baby's name was Obed, meaning Naomi has a son. So now here we are at the genealogy of David, where Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron was the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Amminadab. Amminadab was the father of Nashon. We covered him today. Nashon was the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz. We studied last week. Boaz was the father of Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse. The genealogy of Jesus travels through biblical history to David, King David, who is the direct ancestor of Jesus, our Redeemer. In conclusion, God is the hero of the book of Ruth. Through words and themes and actions, the book of Ruth provides a striking contrast to the depravity and corruption that was so evident in the book of Judges. The narrative of the book of Ruth deals with the redemption of people as it learns to look beyond outward appearances, to act in a sociably responsible manner, and to repudiate the transgressions enumerated in the final chapter of Judges. When the book of Judges continually trots out the refrain, There was no king in Israel. Everyone did as he pleased. The book of Ruth shows how Israel deserved a new era of leadership, anticipating the birth of King David, a descendant of Ruth and Boaz. The book of Ruth is not a woman's only story. The story encompasses Ruth and Naomi's trials and disappointments, Naomi wondering whether or not God has forgotten her. All the trials are fully resolved, showing us that God is intently concerned with women's hearts. Naomi, who we compared to Job, who cried out to God for years, searching and questioning while God is silently moving heaven and earth to show Naomi that she is not forgotten. She is loved. Her life has not been meaningless or purposeless. God showed Naomi that her life matters. God's goodness is a steady lifeline to women. God does not coddle us from our struggles or disappointments because he wants us to be strong. Remember, we are Ezers. God grounds us in truth and opens our eyes to his possibilities. Our strength and our will are our greatest gifts to advance his kingdom, whether we're born female or male. I pray that God will bless your life with courage of Naomi and Ruth, and Boaz. Do not judge yourself lacking for asking God questions because he already has the answers. So thank you for taking this journey with me. And I hope I brought you a different perspective of some things that you might have thought were just, you've heard this story before. So we'll be here next week with a new study and hopefully without tears. Thank you.